Thursday, January 6th, being the anniversary of the insurrection in D.C. If I'm the only person that shows up to this, that's fine with me. All right. So what I want to talk about tonight is it's about what I think that I see as someone who's been involved in activism for about 30 years now, and as a retired combat veteran. Are there any other veterans here? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, everybody but you.
Yeah. Wow, odd man out.
So, what I'm doing Thursday, I'm calling it "We the People Against Autocracy." I wanted to bill it as grassroots and nonpartisan because I think it's something that shouldn't be partisan. I think we should all be able to agree that whether we accept the Constitution, the United States Constitution, or not, it's not a good idea to replace what we currently have with an autocracy. That would be from anybody, whether it's Republican, Democrat, even a Libertarian or an independent, whatever. So I've been involved in activism going back to the 90s. I was very much, if I'm anything in this world, I'm a product of the religious right. I was raised in the religious right. My dad was an evangelical preacher that traveled up and down the hills of Kentucky and southeastern Kentucky preaching revivals all over the place. So I grew up in the pews all the way back in the 1980s when what they called then the Reagan Revolution was going on, and the moral majority, and Jerry Falwell and even Billy Graham was still significant at the time. And so I was very much not just a Republican, but a conservative, a social conservative. And I've had a long evolution to where I am now. I identify as a libertarian. And all my life, I've always heard, in the spheres that I come from, I've always heard, and we like to talk about the threat of tyranny, and I think as libertarians, we take it pretty seriously that we're the vanguard, we're the watchmen, we're the ones who take real seriously watching for any kind of tyrannical threats to our country, to our families, to our future. And that language was used a lot when I was a Republican as well. And one of the things that was common was to talk about the Democratic Party and the evils of socialism, and how concerned we need to be about socialism and the fact that it leads to tyranny, which there's truth in all this. So I have come to the libertarian movement from the right, but I don't consider myself right-wing anymore, but I also don't really consider myself a leftist either. And one of the things that I've noticed within the libertarian movement in the last, about a decade or so now that I've been involved, is that there's still a lot of people who like to talk about the evils and of impending socialism and the tyranny that follows that. But my personal opinion is that there's a huge blind spot, even within the libertarian movement, for the authoritarianism that comes from the right wing. I probably would have never parted with the right wing if I felt like that it was okay, but there is a problem coming from the right. Now, I mentioned the Constitution a little while ago, and we pretty well know, I think everybody here is probably at least a little educated, or you wouldn't be here tonight. And And we know that the Constitution was it was an imperfect document from the beginning. Case in point, the 3/5 compromise. When I joined the military, you guys know when we join the military, we take an oath to the Constitution. I don't have a problem with taking an oath to the Constitution because ultimately I still see it as a productive document, a document that we can use to defend our rights at times. It's got practical application. I think the Bill of Rights in particular is specifically important. And even though the document itself may be problematic from the beginning, it's still built on principles, those underlying principles, the linchpins of the document. Those principles are greater than the document itself.
Yeah, those deeper values. Huh?
Even if we didn't have the U.S. Constitution, we would still have those principles that some of us like to call our natural rights. And those things are worth protecting, Constitution or not. So I'm not really here to make a case for or against the Constitution, other than to say that I took an oath to the Constitution, and I think as libertarians, it's, we like to engage in a lot of philosophical research. We like to debate the academic side of libertarianism and ideology. And I think those things are productive too, and they're important. And I think it's important to continue our education in those things, which I have, and I advocate that others do as well. But what I'm really getting to is beyond the ideological, beyond the academic stuff. If the libertarian movement, the Libertarian Party, if we're ever going to really make any impact, if we're ever going to take our movement to the next level, then we have to go beyond just the philosophical. Now, I'll call myself a libertarian. I'll call myself a voluntarist. That's where I start. It's from voluntarism. I'll even call myself an anarchist at times because I very much identify with the dictionary definition of an anarchist, which is just someone who believes in the non-aggression principle or non-violence, however you want to say it, and that each and every individual has the right to their own conscience, their own beliefs, their own lifestyle, so on and so forth. So, We the People Against Autocracy is something that I developed because I didn't want to bill it as strictly libertarian or Republican, Democrat, independent, whatever. What I'm doing is grassroots. That's what I want people to understand. It's grassroots first. So it doesn't have to wear the label of any kind of partisan label. Also, what I'm going to do on Thursday is a peaceful demonstration. I'll just go ahead and tell you guys here, actually for me, what I'm planning on doing is actually not just peaceful, but actual silent demonstration. But I think it's time for us to go beyond the philosophical, put shoe leather to pavement, and understand that we have to start from wherever we are. If we were starting with a zero-sum game and everybody wanted to make their argument of how we should organize society and around us, then we could talk about how we go from the zero-sum to libertarian society and maybe be able to do that quickly. I would like to go to a libertarian society quickly, but I don't think it's realistic to do it overnight. What I do think is realistic is we have to look at the reality that we're in, where our politics stands today, the form of government that we have right now, the culture that we actually live in, and talk about how do we get from where we are to where we want to go. And we may not be able to do a whole lot of things quickly, but we can always at least be moving in the correct general direction. I say all this because to get to, I don't want to replace the Constitution with an autocracy. Now, I believe firmly that we the people hold all the power. So if we want to go back even before the Constitution and look at the Declaration of Independence and say we want to exercise the same rights that they spoke of in the Declaration of Independence, we are, as Americans, we are very much within our right to dissolve the federal union, to dissolve constitutional government, and to start over and do something different, if we ever decided that we wanted to do that. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating that here right now. What I am saying is, before 2016, before the last Republican administration came along, we already had some very big, serious problems. And I think even beyond the Libertarian movement, most Americans understood that we were, even look back in the polling, the right track, wrong track. Most of the country understood that we're in some really messed up times and we need to make a big course correction, a pretty big course correction. But my contention is that in 2016, we did make a huge course correction in our politics, but it was a course correction in the wrong direction. And I see the election of Donald Trump to office as a move towards more hardcore, radical right-wing politics and an autocratic movement that wants to move us away from, again, whether you believe in constitutional law or not, that's where we are right now. And it's at least an attempt to have the rule of law. My understanding of our forebears, those of us, the veterans especially, my understanding of what our forebears fought for in the American Revolution was that it was about many things. It was about independence from Britain. It was about having our own form of government, or self-determination, thank you. Yep. It was about a lot of things. One of the things that it was definitely about was that we were no longer going to allow ourselves to be subject or serf to a king. We said we're throwing off monarchy, and that's why we're picking up our rifles and fighting back. And when we threw off monarchy, part of what we said is we're throwing off the rule of a leader over us. And we're going to endeavor to have the rule of law, to let the natural law itself be the rules, individualism, and we're going to have a country that's built on laws that are rooted in our natural rights, as opposed to a ruler over us. Now, ever since then, it may have been an imperfect experiment. We're still working on this thing. A more perfect union is what we're always working towards. My contention is that the course correction that we made in our politics has moved us closer towards fascism. And I'm extremely concerned about socialism, but I'm in my 40s now, and I've been concerned about socialism and the tyranny that comes with socialism my entire life. After January the 6th and what we saw there, for the first time in my life, I am more concerned about fascism than I am socialism in the United States. Part of what I want to touch on is the conspiracy culture that has kind of taken over in a lot of our politics. I saw this when I got re-involved after the military. I was involved in the Ron Paul campaign and headed up the group Combat Veterans for Ron Paul. Had a podcast and all that, and did a lot of demonstrations, a lot of activism. Unfortunately, among the different groups that I was plugging into at that time, I realized that within that realm there was a lot of conspiracy culture. And I had a bad taste in my mouth for it from the beginning, because the people that were saying 9/11 is an inside job, that Bush was the one who planned it and made sure that it was carried out, and so on. That really upset me because I had just come back from Afghanistan, and I didn't like the fact that conspiracy theories like that drew away from the real subject, what really led to 9/11 in the first place, and the history there with Osama bin Laden and the CIA and the Mujahideen and the Pashtun people in the Hindu Kush along the Pakistani border. And to trivialize all that and to ignore the problems that drew our country into a war in Afghanistan that ultimately was it was a disaster. It was a disaster. And to draw away from the facts of how we actually got there and to just dismiss it with conspiracy garbage, that really upset me. But I learned to bite my tongue because other people, other activists would talk to me and they would say, look, yes, you and I don't agree with the conspiracy crowd. We don't like all that stuff. But if and when there are issues where we have common ground, we can work on those issues together and they can still be our allies. If they want to help us end the war on drugs, if they want to help us not having these wars overseas, whatever. But just play nice, right? That's what it boiled down to was, hey, let's play nice with the conspiracy people because sometimes they can help on issues and be on our team. So I gritted my teeth, but I bit my tongue, and I went ahead and I played nice with the conspiracy crowd. And what I have found over the last decade, longer than a decade now, is that conspiracy culture has been nothing but a cancer on our politics. It's done nothing but draw us away from real issues and radicalize people behind lies and conspiracies that make absolutely no sense. So I'm going on the record now to say that science is real and that truth will out, and that those who believe in facts will eventually be proven to be correct. And those who are peddling conspiracy culture, eventually people are going to figure out who the propagators are, who the propagandists are. And when they figure out who those propagandists are, they're going to be really upset at those people. I feel so bad for the veterans who took part in what happened on January the 6th last year. I'm not a Democrat. I've never been a Democrat. I don't support Democrats. I've voted for a couple of Democrats in local elections once or twice in my entire life. All right? But Joe Biden won the presidential election, folks. He just did. And to say that he didn't is a fucking lie. And we have to call these lies out. And we have to make sure that we're not participating in perpetuating this stuff. I feel so bad for the veterans who took part in that, because those of them that figured out that they were taken for useful idiots, that they were playing as Trump's useful idiots that day, they're upset. And the ones that have not figured it out yet, but who will figure it out, they're going to be very upset when they figure it out. Behind these lies, what has happened is that people have died. And not only that, but since then, over the course of the last year, they've tried to minimize what happened. The Republican Party, they've tried to minimize it. They've tried to whitewash it and make it a trivial thing, and it's not. Whether you want to replace the Constitution with another form of government or no government, whatever it is, that's one thing. But to overthrow an election and say, we're going to install a person, we're going to end the American experiment in liberal democracy on the grand stage, or in America, what we specifically call our constitutional republic, end that, to end we the people and install an autocrat, it's the wrong direction. We already fought a revolution over that question, and the people who don't want an autocratic ruler won. Those of us that took an oath to the Constitution and call ourselves libertarians today, I don't think it's just enough anymore for us to be passively libertarian. I'm doing what I'm doing at Rutherford County Square here in Murfreesboro at noon on Thursday. I'm going to protest against what Donald Trump and his useful idiots did last year, because I think it's time for us to be not just passively libertarian, but actively anti-authoritarian. And that's for everybody. Not just Republicans, not just Democrats. That's for everybody. Actively anti-authoritarian, because it seems like the only thing that the Republicans and Democrats can agree on anymore is that they just want to go as fast and as hard as we can go towards authoritarianism and potentially autocracy.
Yeah.
So this is where I stand today. If you don't stand with me, that's okay. You're my fellow Americans, and you four specifically are my fellow veterans. If you need me, call on me, all right? We've got to care about each other, and I do. I care about people, and I think you guys probably do too. It's one of the reasons that you're here. Thursday, like I said, even if I show up at noon at the square in Murfreesboro, if I'm the only one that wants to go down there and say Donald Trump is not going to turn this country into an autocracy, that's okay. I'll be the only guy that does it. Despite the death threats that I've had from his supporters, they can all go to hell. Because I took an oath to the Constitution. I fought the Taliban in Afghanistan. I am one of the veterans of this generation of veterans that has been trained to hunt down and end terroristic threats against this country and its people. And I want accountability, because if we don't get accountability, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when we get a dictator.
Absolutely.
Accountability is the only thing that's going to keep this country from having a dictator, and it will not matter which political party they come from. And that's why we have to get accountability. I want to mention one more thing real quick.
For sure.
My grandmother grew up a poor dirt farmer in southeastern Kentucky in Appalachia. My whole family was that way. They ended up being Roosevelt Democrats back in the day. All right. Till her dying day in the early 90s, my grandmother was still pulling the lever for FDR every time she went to vote. But that's not what I want to tell you about. What I want to tell you about is the fact that regardless of how she voted or what other kind of activism she might have been involved in, my grandmother was one of these sweet little old ladies that worked the polls every time that there was an election happening. She considered that her civic duty. She came from a generation where you could be from any political party or no political party and have major disagreements, but at the end of the day, still understand that we're all on the same team. And that we may not, any individual one of us, get everything that we want, but we still have to cooperate. And at the end of the day, we still have to be together somehow. She was one of those people that did not get in people's face. She was not militant. She was not radical. She just understood that she had a duty as an American to try to keep this country free. And so she went to the polls and she worked those polls every year for decades, every time there was an election. And she's gone now. But I think about Mama Martha. I think about my mama. And these people, these Trump supporters that are calling these election officials all over the country, making threats on them right now, driving by their houses, popping off guns and stuff like that. I think about my grandma, and if she was one of those people that is being threatened by these Trump supporters right now. And I got to tell you, I don't feel real calm about that, right? Calling these little old men and women and threatening them because they did their job. They did their job. And we have to be able to protect people like that. We can't allow this thing to get out of hand, but it's already gotten out of hand. And the last thing that I want to mention here is January 6th of last year was not the end of it. Since then, what's happening this year, I'm sure you guys are educated here, you know, there's only about 5 or 6 states in this country that really determine our national elections.
Right.
They're called swing states. And whoever wins those handful of states, you could probably count on one hand, whoever wins those handful of states is typically going to win the national election. Well, right now, the strategy that's being used by the Republican Party in those swing states, the Republican Party happens to already own the House, the legislatures in those states, which means they have a lot of power in those states. One of the things that they're able to do is they're the ones who actually put the election officials in place so that when we hold elections, it's the Republican Party that really has power over the way that those elections are carried out in those swing states. What the Republican Party is doing right now is replacing all of those election officials in the swing states that they already own. They're replacing those people with Trump loyalists in anticipation that in 2024, whether the Republican nominee is Trump or somebody else, in those swing states, all it's going to take is for the conspiracy crowd, Trump loyalists, to say, that's not the way this is going from our state. We could very well in 2024 have a popular vote winner as well as an electoral college vote winner, and it'd be clear cut, but the Republican Party say, no, in our swing states, we're not going to abide by those results. And call it into question and throw it into the throw it into all the muck. And we end up with a situation where we're headed straight into a civil war, folks. And this is not hyperbole. You know, I've not spent my life running around trying to whip people up into a frenzy or scare people or anything like that. But I went home over Christmas break, and my uncle, who is a Democrat, who lives in southeastern Kentucky, happens to be a Democrat and a Christian. And right now, he's frustrated because he can't find a church anywhere in his area that's not doing the stolen election, anti-vaccine, conspiracy shtick. Not one church anywhere close to him. He can't go to church because nobody wants to talk about anything else. I saw my own father last week for the first time in 5 years. A man that I knew my whole life as somebody who enjoyed history, politics, and was educated. And he said this last week and told me to my face that Trump won the election and Joe Biden stole it from him, and what those people did up there on January 6th last year was justified. Our country is being radicalized. All those years that I grew up in the right, and we were talking about tyranny taking over the country and being scared of, like people would talk about, it can happen here. I've believed my whole life, yes, it can happen here. And that's why we rail against socialism so much. It can happen here. We can end up with an autocratic leader. We can end up with a dictator. We can end up with socialism, fascism, theocracy, whatever. Any of it can happen. And that's why liberty is something that always has to be protected. We have to be vigilant across time. So what I'm really getting to then in the end is that I'm going, even if it's just me, and I'm going to let Donald Trump and all his supporters know that what they did last year, they jumped the shark. They crossed the line. They got violent. They went too far. They got violent. And it will be over my goddamn dead body that we will ever have an autocratic leader in this country. Sic semper tyrannis. Sic semper tyrannis. Sic semper tyrannis. I'm not just a libertarian, I'm an anti-authoritarian. And that's where I want this movement to go.
Okay.